The plane didn't feel romantic.
It rarely did. Metal walls. Artificial light. The quiet hum of engines pushing hundreds of lives through the sky like cargo wrapped in intention. Yet sometimes, without permission, moments changed people anyway. At gate 42, passengers boarded in orderly silence, dragging carry-ons and expectations behind them. Marcus Reed stepped onto the aircraft last. Marcus Reed. Marcus was 36.
Tall. Calm.
Black. The kind of man people noticed without knowing why, and then quickly categorized so they wouldn't have to think too much about him. He wore a dark jacket, simple sneakers, no logos. His expression was neutral, almost distant, the face of someone used to observing instead of being welcomed. Seat 18A. Window. Economy. Just the way he liked it. The woman in 18B. She was already seated when Marcus arrived. White blouse. Soft makeup. Hair pulled back loosely, like she hadn't planned to impress anyone but accidentally had. Beautiful, but not loud about it. She glanced up as Marcus stopped beside her. "Oh, hi," she said, moving her bag quickly. "Sorry, I'll make space." "Thank you," Marcus replied gently. Their arms brushed briefly. Nothing dramatic. Just human contact. She smiled politely. "I'm Elena." Marcus. They sat.
Seatbelts clicked.
That should have been the end of it. The eyes around them. It wasn't. 2 rows ahead, a man glanced back, longer than necessary. Across the aisle, a woman leaned toward her friend, whispering. Marcus noticed. He always did. Elena did too. She shifted uncomfortably. "I swear," she muttered quietly, "planes bring out the weirdest behavior." Marcus smiled faintly. "They bring out what's already there." She looked at him, surprised. Turbulence, small talk. As the plane taxied, Elena broke the silence. "So, business or vacation?" Marcus shrugged lightly. "Neither. Visiting my mother." "That's nice," she said warmly. "I'm heading to a conference. I already regret it." Marcus chuckled. Her laugh came easily. Something relaxed between them. Not attraction. Comfort. The first assumption. A flight attendant stopped beside them. "Sir," she said to Marcus, "your seat is actually—" Elena stiffened. Marcus remained calm. "Yes," he asked. The attendant checked her tablet.
"Oh.
My mistake. You're correct." She moved on. Elena frowned. "That was weird." Marcus nodded. "It happens." She looked at him again. Longer this time. When comfort turns into curiosity. Hours passed. Movies played. Lights dimmed. Elena removed her headphones. "Can I ask you something?" she said hesitantly.
"Sure."
"Does it ever get tiring?" she asked softly. "Being expected to explain yourself?" Marcus thought for a moment. "Yes," he said honestly. "But sometimes people surprise you." She smiled. "I hope I'm one of them." "You already are," Marcus replied. Her breath caught, just slightly. The moment that changed the cabin. Turbulence struck suddenly. The plane jolted. Elena gasped, instinctively grabbing Marcus's arm. Her hand stayed there longer than the turbulence. They looked at each other. Something unspoken passed between them. Not desire, but connection. Relief. Human closeness. Elena leaned in without thinking. She pressed a gentle kiss to Marcus's cheek. Not dramatic. Not sexual. Just gratitude. Comfort. The cabin froze. Someone gasped. A phone camera lifted and stopped. Whispers spread like static. Marcus didn't move. Elena realized what she'd done. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Marcus touched her hand lightly. "It's okay," he said quietly. But the moment had already left their row and entered everyone else's judgment. No one clapped. No one laughed. No one yelled. That was what made it uncomfortable. The kiss hadn't been dramatic. It hadn't lingered. It hadn't asked to be noticed. But now it was. Elena slowly pulled back, her hand still resting lightly on Marcus's arm. Her face flushed, not with embarrassment, but with sudden awareness. Around them, the cabin had shifted. The pause that felt loud. Marcus felt it first. The stillness. It was the same feeling he'd experienced in elevators, conference rooms, hotel lobbies, the moment when people decided what a scene meant before asking what it was. He didn't move. Elena glanced around, eyes scanning the rows. People stared, some with confusion, some with curiosity, some with something sharper. She swallowed. She began, then stopped. Marcus leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. You don't owe anyone an explanation, he said. That steadied her more than any apology could have. Whispers travel faster than planes. 2 rows back, a woman whispered. Did you see that? A man near the aisle shook his head. Unbelievable. Another passenger murmured. It's just a kiss. But the word just didn't survive the journey. Elena felt heat rise in her chest. She hadn't planned anything, hadn't crossed a line intentionally. She had simply acted like a human being. And suddenly, that felt controversial. The flight attendant returns. A flight attendant approached, posture neutral but alert. Is everything okay here? She asked. Marcus met her eyes calmly. Yes, he replied. We're fine. The attendant glanced at Elena, then at Marcus, then at the surrounding passengers. She nodded once. Let me know if you need anything. And with that, she walked away. No reprimand. No warning. Just acknowledgement. It didn't satisfy the onlookers. Elena's realization. Elena leaned back in her seat, heart pounding. I didn't think, she whispered. I didn't even. Marcus smiled faintly. That's usually when people act honestly. She exhaled. I hope I didn't make things harder for you. Marcus looked out the window, clouds rolling endlessly beneath them. People decide things regardless, he said. You didn't create that. She studied him. You're used to this. He didn't deny it. A passenger speaks up. Unexpectedly, the man across the aisle leaned forward. For what it's worth, he said, that didn't look inappropriate to me. Elena blinked. Thank you, she said softly. The man shrugged. People need to calm down. A few others nodded. Not loudly, but enough. The tension didn't disappear, but it shifted. Marcus tells the truth. Elena turned to Marcus again. Can I ask you something personal? She said. You already did, he replied gently. She smiled, then grew serious. Does it bother you, she asked, that something so small can become this? Marcus thought carefully. It used to, he said. Then I realized it wasn't about the moment. What was it about? Permission, Marcus replied. People feel uncomfortable when others act freely in ways they don't expect. Elena absorbed that. So what do we do now? She asked. Marcus smiled slightly. We continue the flight. The cabin settles almost. Lights dimmed further. A movie flickered on screens. Most passengers pretended to forget what they'd seen. But a few couldn't. A woman 3 rows up kept glancing back. A phone was lifted once, then lowered. Marcus noticed.
He always did.
Elena noticed too. She straightened her posture. I won't apologize for being kind, she said quietly. Marcus met her gaze. Good, he said. Connection without performance.
They talked softly after that.
About families, travel mishaps, music they both liked but never admitted publicly. No flirting, no dramatics. Just 2 people choosing to remain present. That choice, quiet, unbothered, felt more radical than the kiss itself. Somewhere in the cabin. Not everyone was watching anymore. But some were. And for a few passengers, something uncomfortable had taken root. A question. Why did that bother me? They didn't ask it out loud. But it lingered. Authority doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives with a badge, a practiced smile, and questions that sound neutral until you hear them twice. The request. About an hour after the turbulence, a senior flight attendant stopped beside row 18. She didn't look angry. She didn't look curious. She looked careful. Sir, ma'am, she said evenly, the purser would like a brief word with you. Elena's stomach tightened. Marcus nodded calmly. Of course. They stood together and followed her toward the rear galley. Not separated. Not escorted. Just observed. The galley isn't a courtroom. The purser introduced herself and spoke softly, so no one nearby could hear. There were a few passenger concerns, she said. I just need to confirm that everything between you two is consensual and that neither of you feels uncomfortable. Elena answered immediately. It was my choice, she said. He didn't initiate anything. Marcus added, I'm comfortable. The purser nodded, typing a few notes. That's all I needed to hear, she said. Thank you for your cooperation. No warning. No lecture. Just documentation. That, Marcus knew, was the real point. Back to their seats. As they returned, eyes followed them. Not accusatory. Not friendly. Evaluating. Elena exhaled slowly once she sat down. That felt strange, she whispered. Marcus leaned back. People feel safer when authority confirms what they're allowed to think. She looked at him. And what do you think? That nothing happened that needed permission.
She smiled, small, steady.
The version that starts spreading. Somewhere between rows, the story began changing. It was inappropriate. It made people uncomfortable. They were told to stop. None of it was true. But truth rarely spreads as efficiently as opinion. Elena overheard snippets as passengers walked past. She felt anger rising. They're rewriting it, she said under her breath. Marcus nodded. They usually do. Elena pushes back. When a woman across the aisle muttered something about decency, Elena met her eyes. It was a consensual moment, she said clearly. You don't have to like it, but it wasn't harmful. The woman looked away, startled. A man nearby nodded quietly. That's fair, he said. The cabin didn't erupt. But the tone shifted. Marcus's boundary. A few minutes later, another passenger leaned toward Marcus. Man, you should be careful, he said. People can take things the wrong way. Marcus met his gaze. I am careful, he replied. I just don't apologize for existing. The man had no answer. Elena learned something new. Elena studied Marcus in the low cabin light. You're not trying to prove anything, she said. No, Marcus replied. I'm trying not to let other people define me. She nodded slowly. I think I just learned something. The cabin divides quietly. By now, the flight had split into 3 invisible groups. Those who disapproved. Those who defended. Those who decided it wasn't their business. No one announced which group they belonged to. They revealed it in glances, silence, and who chose to speak. Authority checks in again. The purser passed by once more. All good here, she asked. All good, Marcus replied. She smiled, this time genuinely, and moved on. That smile mattered. Elena felt it too. What didn't happen? No one was removed. No warning was issued. No announcement was made. The flight continued. And that, somehow, frustrated the people who wanted resolution without reflection. A private conversation. Elena leaned toward Marcus. Do you regret it? She asked. He considered the question. No, he said. Do you? She shook her head. Not even a little. They sat in silence after that.
Not awkward.
Intentional. The plane keeps flying. Outside the window, the night stretched endlessly. Inside, the cabin resumed its rhythm: meals, movies, sleep. But something subtle had changed.
People were aware now.
Of themselves. Of reactions they hadn't questioned before. Landing doesn't end a story. It releases it. The descent changes the mood. As the captain announced their descent, the cabin shifted into arrival mode. Seatbacks upright, trays locked, people waking from half-sleep with the urgency of somewhere to be. Marcus fastened his seatbelt without hurry. Elena adjusted hers, then glanced at him. Whatever happens after this, she said quietly, I'm glad I didn't pretend that moment didn't happen. Marcus nodded. So am I. Outside, the city lights grew sharper, closer. The aircraft tilted, engines lowering their pitch like a held breath finally released.
Touchdown.
The wheels hit the runway with a solid thump. Applause rippled lightly through the cabin. Phones came out. Messages sent. Lives resumed. But not for everyone in the same way. Elena noticed a man 2 rows ahead glance back again, whispering to a seatmate. A woman near the aisle took a final look, as if trying to commit the scene to memory. Marcus noticed too. He always did. The walk up the aisle. When the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers stood at once, crowding the aisle. Elena waited. Marcus waited. They stood together when the line moved, not touching, not avoiding each other, just present. As they stepped into the aisle, a middle-aged man brushed past Marcus harder than necessary. "Watch it," the man muttered. Marcus met his eyes calmly. "I am," he said. The man looked away first. Eyes at the door. At the aircraft door, two ground staff stood with neutral expressions, greeting passengers. Nothing unusual. No security. No questions. Elena exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So," she said, attempting a small smile, "guess we didn't break aviation law." Marcus smiled back. "Looks like it." They stepped into the jet bridge. The story begins to travel. Inside the terminal, the flight dispersed quickly, but fragments lingered. A woman spoke animatedly into her phone. "No, I'm serious, this couple." A man shook his head, telling a colleague, "People are too sensitive." Elena heard it all. She stopped walking. "This is already becoming something else," she said. Marcus nodded. "It always does." She looked at him. "Does that ever stop bothering you?" Marcus thought for a moment. "No," he said honestly. "But I don't let it decide my behavior." An unexpected voice. Behind them, someone cleared their throat. It was the man who had defended them earlier on the plane. "Hey," he said a little awkwardly. "Just wanted to say, I'm glad you didn't let it turn into a thing." Elena smiled. "Thank you." He nodded at Marcus. "Safe travels."
And walked away.
That mattered more than the whispers. Choices at the exit. At the terminal split, where passengers branched toward baggage claim or connections, Elena slowed.
"This is me," she said.
Marcus stopped too. "Well," he said, "it was good meeting you." She hesitated, then said, "I don't usually do impulsive things." Marcus raised an eyebrow gently. "Neither do I." She smiled. "So, I guess that means this one mattered." He met her gaze. It did. They stood there a moment longer than necessary. No kiss. No performance. Just mutual understanding. The world resumes unevenly. Elena walked toward baggage claim. She noticed something new. The way people looked at each other. The way reactions formed before facts. The way silence could feel like judgment or like space. She realized the flight had changed how she noticed the world. That felt important. Marcus alone again. Marcus headed toward the exit. Outside, the evening air was cool, grounded. He paused near the glass doors, watching travelers reunite, argue, hurry. The flight replayed in his mind, not as conflict, but as clarity. He hadn't been singled out by rules. He had been measured by perception. And perception, he knew, followed people longer than any aircraft. A message appears. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from his sister. "Mom says you're landing tonight. Dinner's ready if you're not exhausted." He smiled. "On my way." Simple things. Real things. Elena's first conversation. At baggage claim, Elena met a colleague. "Hey," the woman said. "How was the flight?" Elena paused. "Eventful," she said. The colleague laughed. "Good eventful or bad?" Elena thought of Marcus's calm voice, the way he hadn't flinched, the way authority had found nothing wrong. "Honest," she replied. "What follows them?" Neither of them knew it yet, but that moment, quiet, brief, human, would follow them. Into conversations. Into choices. Into how they responded the next time someone hesitated, judged, or assumed. Not because of romance, but because of courage without noise. Some moments end when the door opens. Others step off the plane with you. Elena's Monday morning. By Monday morning, Elena was back in routine.
Coffee.
Emails. A conference room with glass walls and neutral smiles. She almost believed the flight had already faded, until her colleague leaned over during a break. "Hey," he said quietly. Random question. "Were you on flight 782 last night?" Elena's stomach tightened. Yes, she said carefully. He hesitated. My sister was on that flight. She mentioned an interaction. Elena met his eyes. And he shrugged. She said it made her think. Elena exhaled slowly. That makes two of us. How stories mutate. By midday, Elena had heard 3 versions of the same moment. In one, she had caused a scene. In another, Marcus had made people uncomfortable. In a third, it was described simply as a quiet, human thing people didn't know how to process. Only one version felt true, and only one version didn't travel as fast. Marcus and familiar ground. Marcus arrived at his mother's house just before dinner. She hugged him tightly, the way she always did. You look tired, she said. Long flight, he replied. She smiled knowingly. Long flights do that. They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from food that smelled like childhood. So, she said casually, anything interesting happen? Marcus paused. Depends what you mean by interesting. She raised an eyebrow. That means yes. Telling the truth without drama. Marcus told her. Not dramatically. Not defensively. Just facts. His mother listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded slowly. People see what they expect to see, she said. And when they don't, they panic. Marcus smiled faintly. That sounds familiar. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you, she said. Not because of what happened. Because you didn't shrink. That stayed with him. Elena faces a question. That evening, Elena attended a small gathering, friends, nothing formal. Someone brought up travel stories. A woman laughed. I saw this thing online about a plane incident. People are so sensitive these days. Elena felt the room lean in. She could stay quiet.
She chose not to. I was there, she said.
The laughter stopped. It wasn't what people are making it into, Elena continued calmly. It was just 2 people being human. The discomfort came later. A man frowned. But don't you think there are optics? Elena met his gaze. I think we use that word when we don't want to admit we're uncomfortable for personal reasons. Silence followed. Then someone nodded. Marcus notices the shift. The next day, Marcus stopped at a cafe near his mother's house. As he waited for his order, a man behind him spoke. Hey, the man said, unsure. Were you on flight 782? Marcus turned. Yes. The man hesitated. My wife was there. She said she wished she'd spoken up when people were whispering. Marcus nodded. That's good to hear. The man smiled, relieved. Safe travels, he said. Marcus realized something then. The story wasn't just following him. It was changing others too. The question Elena didn't expect. Later that week, Elena received an email from HR. Subject line, quick check-in. Her heart jumped. The meeting was brief. Routine. We just wanted to confirm everything from your recent travel was appropriate, the HR manager said neutrally. It was, Elena replied. Consensual. Documented by the airline. The manager nodded. That's what we have. No warning. No note. Just closure. Elena walked out lighter. Marcus and the weight of familiarity. That night, Marcus sat on the porch, watching the sky darken. He thought about how often moments like this happened without witnesses. How many times people swallowed reactions instead of examining them. This time, someone had noticed. That felt different. A message between them. Elena hesitated before sending the text. Just wanted you to know, things settled on my end. Hope you're doing okay. Marcus replied a few minutes later. I am. Thank you for checking in. A pause. Then, it mattered. What you did. Elena read the message twice. Then smiled. The quiet ripple. Neither of them became symbols. There were no speeches. No social media posts. But conversations shifted. Questions surfaced. And for few people, silence stopped feeling like the safest option. Silence doesn't disappear suddenly. It loosens. Weeks later, life didn't transform overnight. Marcus still woke early. Elena still rushed between meetings. But something subtle had changed in both of them. The way they noticed pauses, the way they measured reactions before accepting them as truth. The flight had become a reference point, not something to relive, something to remember. Elena, at the conference. At the end of the week, Elena attended the conference she'd been traveling to in the first place. A panel discussion. A room full of professionals. A familiar tension hovering beneath polite language. During the Q&A, a junior woman raised her hand. Her voice shook. "I wanted to ask," she said carefully, "how we challenge assumptions without creating conflict." The room went quiet. Elena felt a familiar instinct rise, the urge to give a safe, vague answer. Instead, she spoke honestly. "Sometimes," Elena said, "conflict already exists. We just don't name it." The woman nodded slowly. "And what do we do then?" Elena thought of the flight, of the looks, of the kiss that had never meant to be a statement.
"You stay human," she said.
"And you let other people sit with their discomfort." The room exhaled. That answer traveled. Marcus and a familiar conversation. Marcus met an old friend for lunch. They talked about work, family, nothing heavy, until the friend leaned back and said, "People keep bringing up that flight thing around me." Marcus smiled faintly. "And they're arguing about it," the friend said. "Some defend it, some don't." Marcus nodded. "What do you think?" The friend hesitated. "I think it scared people. Not because of what happened, but because it didn't fit their script." Marcus stirred his drink. "That's usually it. A choice Elena makes." Elena received an invitation to speak at a small community event. No cameras, no press, just conversation. She accepted. When someone asked her later why, she answered simply, "Because it's harder to be honest when no one's watching." Marcus notices the shift at home. At a family gathering, a cousin joked about optics during a heated discussion. Normally, Marcus would have let it slide. This time he didn't. "What do you mean by that?" he asked calmly. The cousin hesitated. "I mean how things look." Marcus nodded. "And who gets to decide that?" The room went quiet. No argument followed. But something adjusted. The message that changed tone. One evening, Elena sent Marcus another message. "I spoke at an event today. Use the flight as an example without details. It helped." Marcus replied, "I'm glad." After a pause, he added, "That moment wasn't about us. But I'm glad we didn't step away from it." Elena read that line carefully. She realized he was right. The connection between them hadn't deepened romantically. It had deepened responsibly. Silence meets resistance. A viral debate flared briefly online about appropriate behavior in public spaces. The flight was never mentioned directly, but the language was familiar. Marcus scrolled past it. Elena did too. They had learned something important. Not every conversation required participation, but some moments required presence. An unexpected test. At work, Elena overheard a coworker dismiss a colleague's concern. "She's overreacting," he said quietly. Elena paused. She felt the old urge to ignore it. Instead, she spoke. "Or maybe she's reacting to something you don't experience," she said calmly. The coworker blinked. He didn't argue. He listened. That was new. Marcus reflects. That night, Marcus walked alone through his neighborhood. He thought about how often silence had been demanded of him. How often he had been expected to shrink so others wouldn't have to think. This time, silence hadn't won. Not because he shouted. Because he stayed. The meaning of the kiss, revisited. Elena wrote in her journal later that week. "It wasn't the kiss that mattered," she wrote. "It was what happened after, who spoke, who stayed quiet, and who decided to be present anyway." She closed the book. Meaning doesn't arrive with announcements. It forms quietly, through repetition, through memory, through the way people choose differently the next time. The conversation that wouldn't die. Weeks after the flight, the story still surfaced. Not loudly, not consistently, but often enough to matter. At dinners, at meetings, at casual gatherings where someone would say, "Did you hear about that thing on a plane?" Marcus noticed something new. The tone was changing. Less judgment. More curiosity. People weren't asking what happened anymore. They were asking why it mattered. Elena in a new role. Elena found herself being asked questions she hadn't been asked before. Not about her job title. Not about credentials. About perspective. During a team retreat, a colleague said, "You seem more direct lately." Elena smiled. "I stopped filtering my humanity." The colleague laughed, then nodded slowly. That answer stayed. Marcus faces an old pattern. Marcus attended a professional workshop, one of those polished rooms with polite language and unspoken hierarchies. During a break, someone joked, "You must get used to standing out." Marcus met his eyes. "I don't stand out," he said calmly. "People project." The man blinked, then said quietly, "Fair point." It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. That counted. The moment becomes a reference. Elena noticed something strange. People began referencing the idea of the flight without knowing the details. "Remember that story about assumptions? That reminded me of something I read." The story had separated from them. It had become a lesson. A call from the airline. One afternoon, Marcus received a call. A representative from the airline thanked him for cooperating during the flight. "We've updated some internal training," she said. "Your feedback helped." Marcus paused. "That's good to hear." When he hung up, he sat quietly for a moment. Systems rarely changed for moments like that. But sometimes, they listened. Elena confronts a question directly. At a community event, someone finally asked what others had avoided. "Do you regret it?" a woman asked. "The kiss, I mean." Elena didn't hesitate.
"No," she said.
"I regret how uncomfortable honesty makes people, but not the honesty itself." The room went quiet. Then someone clapped.
Softly.
Others followed. Marcus and Elena crossed paths again. Months later, by coincidence, Marcus and Elena found themselves in the same city. Different reasons. Different schedules. They met for coffee. No awkwardness. No expectation. Just familiarity. "It's strange," Elena said, stirring her cup. "That moment follows us." Marcus nodded. "But it doesn't define us." She smiled. "That's the best part. The shift becomes clear." Marcus noticed it on another flight. Different plane.
Different city.
A couple laughed quietly in their seats. Someone glanced at them, then looked away. No whispers. No tension. Just people minding their own business. Marcus leaned back. Something had changed. Not everywhere, but somewhere. And that was enough. Elena writes it down. That night, Elena wrote one sentence in her journal. "The world doesn't change when people shout. It changes when someone refuses to shrink." She closed the book. The quiet recognition. Marcus stood at his window later, watching the city lights. He didn't feel victorious. He felt steady. The moment on the plane had never been about proving anything. It had been about staying human when being human felt inconvenient. Not every moment leaves a scar. Some leave a calibration. They don't hurt forever. They adjust how you move through the world. Marcus and Elena were beginning to understand that difference. Time passes differently now. Months had slipped by since the flight. Not forgotten months. Just unremarkable ones. Which Marcus realized was the point. Life resumed its shape. But the edges were smoother. Elena notices the change at work. Elena's workplace hadn't transformed overnight. Deadlines still pressed. Voices still competed. But something subtle had shifted. In meetings, people paused longer before dismissing ideas. Interruptions felt rarer. Questions replaced assumptions more often than before. One afternoon, a junior colleague stopped by Elena's desk. "I wanted to say something," she said nervously. "You don't rush past people anymore." Elena smiled gently. "I think I used to," she admitted. The colleague nodded. "It makes a difference." That sentence stayed with her all day. Marcus, and the unexpected invitation. Marcus received an email he didn't expect. A small community group was hosting a discussion about everyday bias and public spaces. They asked if he'd be willing to attend, not to speak, not to lead.
Just to be there.
Marcus considered declining, then accepted. The room that didn't need a hero. The meeting space was simple. Folding chairs. Coffee in paper cups. No stage.
No spotlight.
People spoke about moments that felt familiar. Being stared at, misread, questioned for existing. Marcus listened. When someone asked him if he wanted to add anything, he shook his head. "I'm here to listen," he said. That somehow felt like enough. Elena's quiet habit. Elena began a small habit she never announced. When someone spoke and others talked over them, she waited, then said, "I want to hear what they were saying." No lecture. No confrontation. Just redirection. People adjusted. Not immediately, but eventually. The world doesn't applaud growth. Neither Marcus nor Elena received praise. There were no awards for restraint. No recognition for choosing patience over performance. But something else appeared.
Trust.
The quiet kind. A second flight. Marcus boarded another plane. Different route. Different airline. He took his seat. A woman beside him smiled politely. They exchanged names. Nothing else. As the flight progressed, the cabin stayed uneventful. Peaceful. Normal. Marcus leaned back and closed his eyes. This was progress too. Elena confronts the past, gently. At a family dinner, someone made an offhand joke about people being too sensitive these days. The table laughed. Elena didn't. She didn't argue either. "What makes you say that?" she asked calmly. The laughter faded. The conversation shifted. No explosion. Just reflection. The moment they acknowledged together. Marcus and Elena met again, this time intentionally. Not to relive the flight, but to talk about what followed. "It's strange," Elena said over coffee. "That one moment changed how much I notice everything else." Marcus nodded. "It made me less tired," he said.
She looked surprised. How?
"I stopped wondering if silence was safer," he replied. She smiled softly. "That's a gift. The legacy takes shape." Neither of them would write about it.
Neither would post about it.
But the legacy existed anyway. In meetings where someone waited. In flights where no one whispered. In conversations that paused instead of judged. The question that no longer hurts. Someone eventually asked Marcus, "Do you think things are getting better?" Marcus thought for a moment. "I think people are noticing themselves more," he said. The person nodded. That answer felt right. Elena writes one last line. Late one night, Elena added a final note to her journal. Change doesn't arrive when people agree. It arrives when they stay present. She closed the book. Not every story needs a climax. Some need distance. Time had given Marcus and Elena something neither of them expected. Not closure, but perspective. A year changes the shape of things. Almost a year had passed since the flight. Not the kind of year marked by anniversaries or reminders, just a quiet accumulation of days where life continued doing what it always did. Marcus had changed jobs. Elena had changed teams. Neither change was dramatic. Both were deliberate. Marcus and the absence of tension. Marcus noticed it most in places where tension used to live. Elevators. Waiting rooms.
Airports.
He still felt eyes sometimes, but they didn't linger the same way. Or maybe he had learned not to carry them with him. That realization mattered. Elena's new confidence. Elena didn't become louder. She became clearer. In meetings, she no longer softened statements to make them easier to accept. She didn't sharpen them either. She spoke plainly. And people listened. One afternoon, a senior colleague told her, "You're harder to interrupt now." Elena smiled. "I stopped asking for permission." The question Marcus is asked again. At a professional dinner, someone finally asked Marcus what others danced around. "Did that moment on the plane change you?" Marcus considered the question. "It clarified things," he said. "How so?" "It reminded me that dignity doesn't come from control," Marcus replied. "It comes from consistency." The table went quiet. Then someone nodded. The story loses its edge. The flight story surfaced less often now. When it did, it sounded different. It wasn't a scandal, people said. It was just revealing. The sharp edges had dulled. What remained was meaning. Elena's unexpected thank you. One evening, Elena received a message from someone she barely remembered from the conference months earlier. I wanted you to know I spoke up at work today. I don't think I would have before. Elena stared at the screen. She typed back. I'm glad you did. Nothing else was needed. Marcus returns to the sky. Marcus boarded another flight late one evening. Middle seat. Economy. Unremarkable. As the plane leveled off, he watched a couple across the aisle share a quiet moment, heads leaning together, unaware of anyone else. No one stared. No one whispered. Marcus smiled faintly. This was how it was supposed to be. Elena encounters the past briefly. At a networking event, Elena overheard someone reference that plane story again. She didn't correct them. She didn't engage. She realized something important. The story no longer belonged to her. And that was freedom. A final meeting between them. Marcus and Elena met one last time, not by coincidence, not by necessity, just choice. They walked through a park, leaves shifting underfoot. It feels finished, Elena said. Marcus nodded. Not forgotten, he replied. Just integrated. She smiled. That's a good word. They stopped walking. No hug. No drama. Just gratitude. The real impact. Neither Marcus nor Elena would ever be fully aware of how many people had adjusted their behavior because of that flight. They wouldn't count the conversations that changed course, or the silences that turned into questions. But the impact existed, and that was enough. The shape of the ending. As they parted ways, Elena said one last thing. I'm glad we didn't make it bigger than it was. Marcus nodded. I'm glad we didn't make it smaller either. They went their separate directions. The world didn't change overnight. It never does. There was no headline announcing growth. No trending clip proving lessons were learned. No single moment where everyone agreed. What changed was smaller, and therefore harder to undo. A different kind of memory. A year after the flight, Marcus Reed no longer thought about it every time he boarded a plane. He didn't brace himself. He didn't scan the cabin. He simply found a seat and settled in. That, he realized, was the difference. The moment had stopped living inside him. Elena's quiet confidence. Elena noticed it too, how the story had softened into something usable rather than sharp. She had stopped explaining it to people. Stopped defending it. Stopped measuring reactions. When someone asked her once, casually, "Didn't you have that weird plane experience?" She smiled and said, "It wasn't weird. It was honest," and left it at that. The letter Elena never sent. One evening, Elena wrote a letter she never mailed. Not to Marcus. Not to anyone else. Just to mark the moment. I learned that kindness doesn't need permission. And that discomfort isn't danger. Some people confuse the two and build rules around that confusion. I won't anymore. She folded the paper and tucked it into a drawer. Not as a reminder. As a boundary. Marcus, watching without weight. Marcus stood in an airport terminal months later, watching passengers move with practiced urgency. A child laughed. A couple argued quietly. A woman leaned her head on a stranger's shoulder, comfortable. No one stared. No one whispered. Marcus felt something rare. Ease. A familiar sound. The boarding announcement echoed. Marcus took his place in line. Ahead of him, a man hesitated, unsure which group he belonged to. Marcus said gently, "You're good here." The man smiled, relieved. Small moments. That was how change stayed. Elena's last test. At a workshop she facilitated, someone asked a question that used to irritate her. What if being open makes people uncomfortable? Elena didn't rush. Then we let them be uncomfortable, she said calmly. Discomfort is part of learning. Harm is not. The room nodded. No debate followed. That told her everything. One final flight. Late one evening, Marcus boarded another plane. Window seat. Economy. He placed his bag beneath the seat, fastened his belt, and looked out at the runway lights. The engines hummed steadily. A flight attendant passed and smiled. Welcome aboard. Marcus nodded politely. The sky doesn't judge. As the plane lifted, Marcus watched the city fall away. Thousands of lives below. Thousands of private moments. Thousands of choices made quietly, without audience. He thought of the kiss, not as an event, but as a signal. Not romance. Not rebellion. Just humanity refusing to shrink. The world, unchanged and changed. The world still argued. Still judged. Still whispered. But somewhere along the way, a few people paused instead. They waited. They listened. They let moments exist without rewriting them. That was enough. Final words. Some people think progress is loud. It isn't. It's patient. It's subtle. It shows up when no one is watching. At 30,000 feet, two people chose to stay human. And the world quietly made room.